So honestly, I couldn't remember what this movie was even about, even though I saw the trailer maybe once. I thought it was about them like flying to the sun and launching a nuclear bomb into it or something like that, because I thought maybe it was a story about the sun dying, but they had to go fix the sun. I didn't realize it was a story about like an intergalactic virus that was killing all the stars in across the solar system. So I was a little bit off, but I was close. And so when this movie began, I was kind of confused, just like the main character. Like I didn't know what was going on or why he was there or what the mission even was. So it was nice to actually be kind of surprised as to like what the plot is, because I couldn't remember and I didn't know. And I just knew I kind of wanted to see this movie because I did actually really like the Martian movie. And I read part of that novel, but I have yet to actually read this novel. I'm not sure if I want to, because I think he gets kind of really technical into the science of things, but that might actually be a good read, so I might check that out later on if I feel like it. As far as my thoughts and feelings of this movie, I went and saw it in the IMAX, so I of course recommend, if you see this, definitely see it in an IMAX, because the space scenes in any space movie always look absolutely fabulous on an IMAX screen. It's the best way to see these kinds of movies, and I kind of didn't notice this, but I heard someone behind me talking about it after the movie ended, is that they filmed the scenes for like the space portions in more of that, it's called like a flat format rather than the scope where it takes up a more vertical space on the screen, and that the Earth scenes were actually more of the traditional like super wide screen, which is called scope. So something you need to know about IMAX is that when you see an IMAX Hollywood movie, it's never really truly 100% IMAX sized, because actual IMAX like proportions is closer to like a 4:3, and the screens are actually more of a square shape. So when they're filming modern movies in IMAX, I'm not sure if those digital IMAX cameras that they're using are like actual digital or if they're film based and then they're kind of cropping them down to flat format, because if you look at an IMAX screen, it's never really fully filling the screen, because that would actually be a 4:3 format, which was the original IMAX film format way back when they first created the technology. So when you see something saying like IMAX size, it's more of what we call flat. So I know about this stuff with formatting for film because I worked at the movie theater that had an actual IMAX, like the real one, for like almost 20 years before they fired everyone in 2020. So there's a difference between scope and flat. So what they usually do is they kind of make the IMAX portions more of the flat, which is what your HD TV proportions are, versus scope, where it's kind of the super more narrow widescreen, where you have those black bars up on the top and the bottom. So that's kind of getting more into the technical side of IMAX, but this movie didn't fill the full IMAX screen, but it fills more of it during the space portions, and then the Earth scenes were more of the scope, where it's more narrow with the larger black bars above and below. And then I saw something online later saying that they filmed it digitally, but then they went and transferred the digital to film like 2 times to try to get like a film grain look, which I did notice the film grain while I was watching it, and I kind of thought that was weird. I was like, oh, did they actually film this with real film? Because I see film grain here. But then I kind of wonder, like, why even film it digitally? Like, why not just film it as film to start with? But maybe they don't really have the film in the cameras as much anymore since they've gone mostly digital. Who knows? But it's kind of an interesting aesthetic to give those scenes, though I would kind of like to see them just skip the digital portion entirely, I guess, if they're going to go and do something like that. And then another interesting thing about this movie is that I guess the alien is actually a puppet the whole movie, and I swear I thought it was just CGI the entire movie. Like I couldn't even tell it was like an actual thing on screen, and maybe that information was wrong. It just saw some blip online about it, so I'm not sure, and I don't really feel like looking it up, but it looked entirely CGI to me. So if it was an actual puppet, like props to the puppet guys, because it looked really good if it's a puppet. If it's CGI, then it's, who cares? That's what you expect out of any Hollywood movie. So it's like you're unimpressed if it's CGI, but if it's a puppet, that's actually really cool and looks great. So it's kind of like that different mastercraft critique there. So impressive if it's a puppet, unimpressive if it's CGI. So that's where we are in the world of art and film these days. As far as like the actual plot of the movie goes, is it gets kind of really technical and scientific in certain scenes, and it's a little bit hard to kind of follow along with some of it because the audio of like the dialogue might be a little bit too muted, or like the volume's not quite as loud for some reason. So he says some things occasionally, which I didn't quite hear what he was saying. I was like, what is the technical part that he said there? Or like he's doing some math on the screen to calculate like the travel time. And they didn't really focus on the number that he wrote long enough. So I'm not sure if it said like 1,000 years or 10 years for him to travel back to Earth, which is like part of the problem of the journey, is like, you know, it's a one-way trip because he only has enough fuel to go there but not to go back, right? That's the max they could produce in the amount of time that they needed. So I kind of wish they had shown that a little bit more clearly, like what is the dilemma, why he can't go back, or like how long would that be, and also what is the relativity of the travel? Like, is it a couple years for him to get there, or was it 10 years for him? Or on Earth, is it the relativity where it's 30 years on Earth goes by while it's only a couple years for him? But they never really get into that in the movie. I'm not sure if the book does, but that's something I kind of was thinking about the whole movie. I was like, how much time is going by on Earth, and they only have 15 years to live, maybe 30 or 20 years. They could have gotten a little more technical onto the relativity of the space travel and time flow, because that was a little unclear to me. Another thing I kept thinking about was his food supply. So he says later that he has enough to get him back, like a couple years worth of food, but you know, it's not enough to do a certain journey. So I'm wondering, like, okay, if he only has a couple years worth of food and then he has to go back with the Rocky to his planet, and that's like 6 extra years to get there, like how is he getting food? They did show that they were growing like plants on the ship, so maybe he could grow his own food, possibly in space. Is that the plan? I don't know. They didn't really get into the survival elements as much, which I kind of wish they did, just because my brain really likes to go into that area, like of what is the more technical reason of why this can happen, or how can this happen, and can he survive? Because I'm not exactly sure how he still had enough food to get to Rocky's planet when that's like 6 extra years or whoever knows how long, versus the only 3 years worth of food that he claimed to have. Another thing that I thought was kind of annoying to me in the movie was that he's kind of condescending towards the alien. Like, he kind of treats it like a little pet, and it's more of like a joke, and the way it reacts to like the tape measure and stuff makes it seem like the alien's kind of stupid. But you know, it's also another interplanetary traveling species that can build spaceships that are better than his and able to do math and all this other stuff. So I kind of didn't like that they were a little bit kind of condescending towards the species, even though it's kind of like on par with human knowledge or intelligence. But he did say something like they don't have relativity, but I would have liked a little bit more information about that species there. Oh, another thing about the alien is that they kind of see through like echolocation. So technically, if it could hear him like whispering, you know, across the room, couldn't it kind of also detect like his heartbeat and breathing and other like bodily functions? So he would know if he's alive like at all times. So like the scene when he thinks he might be dead on the console towards the end, like couldn't he be able to like hear his heart beating and other life functions to know he's not dead? So like the alien reacting as if he is dead when he could clearly, you know, hear that he isn't, I would assume. Seems kind of weird, but I guess we need the drama for the movie, and you need him to be having emotional responses. So I guess that's getting a little too deep scientifically into this fictional species that, you know, we don't really know all that much about, and it doesn't really give us too much information. Another thing, once they get towards the end and they start, you know, making all these things for their plan, they don't do a good job really telling you as much of what exactly they are doing. It's kind of a little bit rushed, despite the fact that this movie's like 3 hours long. They kind of don't get into a lot of the details of exactly what they're doing or what's happening, which sometimes I wish they did. Like some of the flashback stuff maybe could have been a little bit cut back to get a little bit more on the technical side, but then I think a lot of audience members would be too bored like hearing that information, so they probably just went with what's the bare bones, like minimalist amount of scientific information we can throw out of the audience and still keep them engaged, because, you know, most people probably would get too bored with that information. Oh, and then this was a Lord and Miller film. I had no idea. I like their movies for the most part. Like, I think I like their Lego movies the most. Did they do both of them? I can't remember, but definitely the second one I really enjoyed. And so I was kind of wondering what they had been working on recently, and it was this movie. So it's got a pretty good amount of humor, and it's pretty good overall, but I think I like some of the other movies a little bit better than this one. And I still want to see their version of the Han Solo movie because I think it's like supposed to be a musical comedy, which I actually would really love to see that cut. So someone please release the Lord and Miller cut of Han Solo someday because that needs to see the light of day. Oh, and then I keep wondering about, they put him in like an induced coma to travel through space, so they don't tell us how long he's been in a coma. Was he in it for several years? But they don't really get into like the science of being in an induced coma that long, so I assume he was being fed through like an IV and then just hooked up to a catheter or something like that. But then if you're flying around in space in a coma, like, can you still get bed sores? But he was in gravity, right? So his body's not moving, so his muscles and stuff should be atrophied, but they aren't really. So maybe the machine was doing something. I don't know. They don't talk about anything like that at all. But those are the kinds of questions I have when I'm watching a movie. It's like, how do you sit in a coma for 5 years medically on a spaceship and still be able to get up and move around pretty well after that? So no one gets into that, and they never will. But that's something I will continue to think about. I think the overall messaging for this movie is a positive one because it's more of an analogy of, working together with others for that common goal and to actually be sacrificial for basically humanity or other species or the greater good. So him and the alien are both working towards that, and they're able to communicate and accomplish their goal. So it has that positive messaging, and I enjoy that kind of storytelling, and watching them try to communicate is a fun part of the film. Again, they don't get into the technicalities of how well or how his computer does the translating. I guess it's maybe using like an LLM or something to translate that stuff, but they figure out how to communicate pretty quickly with the computer, and I'm assuming it kind of translates back to the alien in its language, the English portion. I don't know. They don't get into that, but you just say, okay, the computer translates so they can communicate now. But they're able to do that, and it's fun when they first see each other, how they're both scared of each other. Like the alien doesn't, creates a teeny tiny little window for him to peek through, and, won't let him see clearly because, obviously the alien is scared of him also at the same time. And then the second time it's got the bigger kind of glass restricted view so they can see each other, but there's still, a wall between them because how can they trust each other? They don't really know each other. But then they find that common language through the clocks and trying to communicate and math and numbers and all that. And seeing, him build a bond with a weird rock monster is kind of funny. And I actually was kind of scared when I first saw it because it looked like a rock spider from like Zelda dungeon or something. I was like, oh god, it's a disgusting spider monster in space, which it grows on you, but it still doesn't have a face, and it eats through its like underside, and it's kind of weird. But it's good to see an alien that's not just like a version of a human with a cute face and stupid stuff like that. So I'm all about finding alternative life forms that aren't water-based. They're a rock carbon-based monster, and we're basically humans are water-based creatures. So it's good to see that kind of mix up in creativity. I did like how in the ending he ends up going to the alien planet, so we do get to see a little bit more of some of the other aliens, and that he ends up just being a teacher there, which I think is a pretty cool idea. But he's still kind of like a zoo animal living in their like biodome until someday when he gets to leave. But I think it would be kind of cool if when he leaves, some of the aliens should go with him to see Earth, and kind of explore Earth and create that sort of interspecies, intergalactic, or is it interplanetary relationship would be kind of cool. I mean, we won't see that in the movie, but it's kind of like gets you thinking about the future relationships of Earth and space and other species, because of course there's other life out there in space. It's just everything is so far away. It's like you'll never get there. It's like what, a million light years or something. Like you'll never get there. Like you can't survive that long unless you find some sort of way to like warp through space or something and not die. So also once you get to the edge of our like solar system, it's basically all pure radiation, and you would just die really fast because like the sun is protecting us even all the way out to a certain limit from dying. It's just, space is a scary place. So in the end, it's pretty cool. I like the ending, and maybe someday he'll go back to Earth, but then it would be so much further in the future that you kind of wonder, like, how would the Earth have changed? Will it be like hundreds of years later, 1,000 years later? Like, what is the relativity time happening here? Would it be like Planet of the Apes where he comes back to Earth and it's, totally different planet? All kinds of crazy things could happen, but you'll want to assume it's not too far in the future, or maybe we could. Maybe he doesn't care. He had no friends or family right on Earth, so it doesn't make a difference anyway to him. It would be more of like a vacation to go back to Earth and see, I wonder what Earth is like 1,000 years later. Let's go find out. So overall, I enjoyed the movie. Not as much as The Martian, but it's still fun in its own. Although it did have the same kind of weird stuff where the Chinese space like program saves him somehow. Like in The Martian, if you remember, like that was the Chinese that built the ship that saved him in this movie. It's also like the Chinese National Space Program or something that's all over the place in this film, which would never really happen in reality because NASA does not work with China due to like all the ethical reasons that they're not allowed to. So I think that must be an Amazon Studio thing. They probably have a huge contract with China where they had to like put China as a major space partner in there rather than like Japan or some other country. So that was another thing that you should kind of think about going into this movie, is like the studios do have those political alignments, especially when they're making the films. And like, even an Iron Man has like special scenes made for China that were never released in the US. So that kind of stuff happens all the time. So keep an open mind for those sorts of things when you're watching these movies, because they do affect them a lot, just really subtly. And if you're not really looking for it, you're not going to really notice that it's happening. So overall, I say still a good movie, enjoyable. I think a lot of other people are really going to like this movie. People like me who tend to kind of hate most movies might be more like me, or middle ground, like it's not so bad. But it's not bad. I enjoyed it. And I give it 2 out of 3 stars. It's not the greatest, fabulous, bestest movie ever, but still enjoyable. And it's not a piece of shit. So get out there, go see an original movie, have fun, support the author so that we get more movies like this in the future. Thanks for listening.